in my work, I like to focus on the origins of religious ideas. In particular, where do the religious ideas that we have today come from, and how far back can we trace them, and what is their meaning? And it turns out that they're very unifying underneath all of the divisiveness that we see on the surface. So tracing back religion to the earliest times and then moving forward and seeing how it's developed is really important to me. And it also occurs to me that it would be extremely helpful for all of humanity to realize that there is this underlying unity. So these are major themes, and those origins that it all starts to resolve itself to are basically nature worship, astrotheology, the study of the sun, the moon, the stars, constellations, planets, their movements, their interaction with the Earth's natural forces as well. This is all what humanity has been looking at, of course, with great awe and reverence for thousands of years, and it's extremely important, I think, for us to get back to those roots, because those ideas have now become highly corrupted and, as I say, very divisive, and that's why we see never-ending battling and warfare. Yeah, we really need to reach back to these more innocent eras before we started. The destruction of the planet is also directly tied to religious ideation. That's one of the things that provoked me into this field. Was I noticed that as far as the environment went, that there were all kinds of religious excuses not to pay attention to our natural world, not to revere it, not to treat it with respect. And so I thought, well, this religious fanaticism has now become a pathology that needs to be addressed. The difference between astrotheology and astrology is that with astrology, you're basically looking at how the planets and constellations and so forth affect your personal life. And astrotheology is more a development of an entire system of reverence for the natural forces. And it expresses itself not only in, like I say, casting horoscopes. That is that's like almost no part of astrotheology, but it has to do with where is the sun during certain times of the year in relationship to the Earth, and how does that benefit life on Earth? That would be like, planting and harvesting, and the moon's phases and how they actually affect the tides, for example, the positioning of certain constellations heralding the arrival of spring, the arrival of the flooding of the Nile, for example, in Egypt. That was incredibly important. They would look at the constellation of Orion and the star Sirius as markers of when the Nile would overflow its banks and provide fertile land that they could then plant and harvest, and that was crucial to life along the Nile. So you could see that's how astrotheology develops. Then the natural elements are looked at as having personality and even in many cases benevolence. It depends on where you are. For example, if you're in an area that's highly desertified, and the sun becomes an enemy. It's a pestilence. But if you're in the northern hemisphere, in the colder regions, the sun is very much the savior of mankind. It brings with it, not only on a daily basis, great relief from the difficulties of night, including the cold and the fear that we feel with the darkness, but also during the year when at the winter solstice, when the sun is now the days are starting to get longer again, the sun is viewed as finally relieving the death of winter. So there's a big difference there. Well, astrotheology is the observation of the natural forces, of the movements and phases of the sun, the moon, the stars, the constellations, the planets, and so on. And the seasons would be a result of those movements. Mythicism is the perspective that many of the ancient figures we find within religion and mythology are actually myths as opposed to real people. They might have some aspects of them may be partially historical, but then that's a whole other field called evamerism. And mythicism is where in many instances there is no real person that you can point to. For example, the god Hercules. There were something like 44 Herculeses in ancient Egypt. But to say that one Hercules that we find in Greek mythology was a real person would not be accurate. So the mythicist position is to say that we think of Zeus and Hercules and other mythological figures as myths, and then projecting that onto biblical characters, that same perspective, is where it becomes controversial. That's mythicism. Why is Jesus mythicism not more widely accepted and investigated, explored? Well, obviously the first thing is that there's a great deal of immediate prejudice based on the programming we receive as children. I mean, you know, this is a story that has been ingrained in us, and in our rituals, you know, Christmas and Easter. So much of our lives are invested in Christianity being true. So there's great resistance there on a personal level, but also professionally speaking, our major universities have been funded by Christian organizations. So they were founded by Christians as well. For example, Yale, Harvard, Princeton, Columbia. These are the top universities in the United States, and they were founded by Christians and for the specific purpose of furthering Christian education. So it has not been in their purview to explore Christianity as a mythical system. A lot of scholars today, especially biblical scholars, are not aware of mythology to be found in other cultures, so they can't see the parallels, and they may not even be looking for parallels that are not necessarily mythological, but that are from prior literature, such as the story of a ruler being threatened by a divine child and then having to go on a rampage to destroy that child and somehow not being able to figure out which one it was and destroy it. This is also found in the religion of Krishna. So at his birth, he's prophesied to overthrow the king, and the king goes on a rampage and kills a number of children to try to get rid of him. So there's another theme that if they're not aware of these, you know, they haven't been laid out. We're seeing them being laid out now, and more people will probably be looking at that then. But if they hadn't been laid out really clearly, then you know they're not going to look for that. They're going to assume that this is something that actually happened. This is the assumption a priori, is that it's something that has happened. But if you start picking apart the precedents, then you have to start questioning all of the different aspects. Where are they getting it from? Some of them are clearly from mythology, from pagan mythology. Some of them are from the Old Testament. And then it's, I mean, we know that people like Pilate and Herod were historical figures, so there has to be some historicity there as far as those characters are concerned. And then we also have place names like Galilee and Chorazin and so forth. I mean, so these places evidently existed. So it'd be like you're taking the story of Gulliver's Travels. You know, Gulliver is clearly not a real person. The Yahoos and the Lilliputians and so forth, these are not real characters. But it takes place, part of it takes place in England. We know England exists. It doesn't mean the story is real, though.